On the morning of February 24th, 1986, John Rutten woke up early and got dressed before kissing his wife and leaving for his job as an engineer at a local computer storage company. But when he would return that evening, his life would be forever changed. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. As John was getting ready for work that morning, Sherry was still in bed. Normally, she would be getting dressed right alongside him, getting ready for her shift as Director of Critical Area Nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. But today she was debating whether or not to call in sick. She wasn't feeling well, and for good reason. She had been being harassed for several months, and it was really starting to take its toll on her. She was anxious all the time, and now this person had even shown up unannounced to Sherry's work a few weeks prior. As John walked out the door, Sherry kissed him goodbye and told him that, whatever she decided, she was still looking forward to seeing him later that evening. They were newlyweds, and so, in spite of the harassment Sherry was dealing with, this was still an overall happy time in her life. Later that evening, at around 6 p.m., John pulls into the garage and sees that Sherry's BMW isn't there, so she must have decided to go ahead and go to work after all. But as he opens the front door, he notices that it isn't locked. And as the door opens, he immediately sees that there, in the floor in front of him, is a bruised and bloodied Sherry. Immediately, he rushes over to see if there's a pulse, but it's too late. She's been dead for hours. First responders and detectives are on the scene by 6:30, and what they see is gruesome. Sherry's face is swollen and bruised, and she's been shot in the chest 3 times, and there's a bite mark on her arm. What they quickly determine is that Sherry did not go down easy. There was an intense struggle that led to broken glass, overturned furniture, and a shattered vase that was likely used as a weapon at some point. As detectives investigate, they found that there were a few items stolen, including Sherry's BMW. But what was strange is that, though drawers were pulled out, all of the jewelry was untouched. In fact, the only things stolen aside from a car were Sherry and John's marriage certificate, a VCR, and a stereo. Since the majority of domestic homicides involve partners or family members, police initially were suspicious of John. But he was quickly ruled out. His grief seemed genuine, and his alibi checked out. So after ruling John out as a suspect, investigators immediately locked on to the burglary gone wrong theory. This case seemed to be right in line with 2 other criminals the police had been looking for. They had been targeting homes in the area lately, and their MO was to break into homes during daylight hours, expecting owners to be at work. But they did occasionally run into people inside their homes. Normally, these men would use a handgun or some blunt weapon to threaten and scare the victims into doing what they wanted. But if the homeowner resisted, these guys were known to get physical. But while the men may have hit their victims with a weapon, it was always just enough to kind of bring them in line or slow them down. Their main focus was just to get away from the scene as fast as they could before the police were called. These were bad men, to be sure. But had they really gone so far as to beat an innocent woman and then shoot her 3 times? A neighbor had reported seeing 2 strange men near John and Sherry's condo on the day of the murder. Police had already identified the 2 suspects that they believed were responsible for the burglaries, and they were already investigating them on that front. The police questioned the men, but though their alibi didn't fully clear them, it didn't condemn them either. And there was no physical evidence that these 2 had ever been in Sherry's condo. Detectives didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. Police still believed there was a burglary gone wrong, but without evidence linking anyone to the crime, the case went cold. But in 2005, the LAPD's Cold Case Unit began to systematically review unsolved homicides that had biological evidence collected from the crime scene. Though initially police had collected fingerprints, blood samples, and the bite mark was swabbed for DNA, the bite mark was the only remaining piece of forensic evidence available. When the results came back, it shocked detectives. All this time, the focus was on two men, but the DNA from the saliva on the bite mark was that of a woman. Then, in 2009, Detective Jim Nuttall was re-examining the case files when everything started to make sense. The police had never followed up on a lead from Sherry's father that would point them straight to the true killer. A woman Sherry's husband John had dated on and off from 1970 right up until the time he met Sherry in 1983. The very woman that had been harassing Sherry for months prior to the murder. Police just needed to obtain a sample of the suspect's DNA to confirm that it matched the bite marks. They were able to do just that by obtaining a cup that the suspect had used from the trash. Finally, there was just one more thing they needed before they made an arrest: to question the suspect. Detectives brought in Officer Stephanie Lazarus, who had been working on the case at the time of the initial investigation. The detective started asking her questions about her former boyfriend, John Rutten. Here is a reconstruction of what happened on Monday, February 24th, 1986, the day of Sherry's murder. After John left for work that day, Sherry stayed in bed and tried to get some rest. But around 8 a.m., there's a knock at the door, so she gets up, puts on her robe, and goes to answer it. Standing on the other side of the door is the woman that's been harassing her for months now, Stephanie Lazarus. Sherry immediately tenses up for another round of hearing about how John belongs with Stephanie and more intimidation attempts. But this time, Lazarus forces her way in. It's unclear if she used her badge as some sort of authoritative leverage to get inside, but either way, she came inside and shut the door behind her. Stephanie is angry. She's jealous and unstable. So quickly an argument breaks out, as it had several times before. But this time, Lazarus snaps. She lunges at Sherry, punching and shoving, but Sherry's a lot tougher than Lazarus had bargained for. She was strong, athletic, and she was a student of self-defense. The fight rages, and it's pure chaos. They're knocking over furniture, ramming each other into walls, but ultimately Lazarus manages to pull her sidearm and bash Sherry in the face with it. Immediately, this causes severe trauma. But Sherry keeps on fighting, in spite of being hit with the butt of this gun several times. As she tries to wrestle away the gun, she's almost got it when Lazarus bites down hard on Sherry's arm. As Officer Lazarus regains control, she shoves Sherry back and fires 3 shots off at close range from her .38 caliber revolver. Now Lazarus knows she has to make it look like a burglary gone wrong. She can't let suspicion point to a crime of passion, or have it even seem like there was a connection between the killer and victim. So she goes through the house, pulling out drawers, scattering papers, and just making it look like the many robberies she's seen in her career. After that, she takes off in Sherry's BMW, abandoning it in a nearby neighborhood. Then, she acted as if nothing had ever happened. For 23 years, she lived her life as a respected officer, a detective, a woman who had fooled everyone around her. But on May 11th, 2012, in a Los Angeles courtroom, Stephanie Lazarus faced the moment she could no longer outrun, the moment justice finally caught her. On March 8th, 2012, after a month-long trial, the jury deliberated for just one day. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreperson stood and read the verdict. Then the words that shattered the illusion that Lazarus had maintained for decades. We, the jury, find the defendant, Stephanie Lazarus, guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For a crime that took only minutes to commit, the sentence would ensure that Lazarus would likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. Stephanie Lazarus is currently serving her sentence at the California Institute for Women in Corona, California. That's it for today's episode of Legends May Live. If you enjoyed listening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and send to a friend. Until next time, keep a lookout and keep your eyes open.